Even though I'm not sure whether I do in fact believe in ghosts and the supernatural, I must be the Ghost Stories world's biggest fan and relentless reader, and have been a patron of your site for many, many years, at least a decade now. Like I said, not being totally sure whether I do actually believe in ghosts, I've never had a story of my own contribute to a website. However, over the past months, possibly years, certain things have happened in our current rented home. Occurrences in this house that made me think twice, maybe even 3 times about what I actually do and don't believe in. My husband Craig and I have been living in our rented home here in Melbourne, Australia for almost 4 years now. We rent privately and know very little about the house and its history, apart from the fact that we are private renters and the rent has always been almost ridiculously cheap. The house isn't that old, however. It would only be about 15 or 20 years old. We do know, however, that several of the last tenants that lived here, families with children, by the look of the wall drawings in the study and backyard, moved out fairly quick after moving in, which has always puzzled me, as the house isn't in that bad a shape. The neighborhood is okay, and the rent, like I said, has always been ridiculously cheap. Any questionable incident that has happened in this house has either taken place in the lounge room or the nursery. My daughter is now 3 months short of turning 3. I remember one time when my daughter was tiny. She would have been 6 months old at the time. We'd put her to bed in her cot in her room. She's always been a fire alarm screamer, and on this particular day, after screaming for about 10 minutes, she quite suddenly stopped dead. Assuming that she had just fallen asleep, I walked outside into the backyard about 10 minutes later to feed the dog. I looked through her window subtly to make sure that all was calm in her room, when I noticed a very strange thing. My daughter did not look close to sleeping at all. She was in fact staring intently at the ceiling. I watched her eyes move from left to right and so forth, as if she was watching something very closely, but there was nothing there. Not thinking all that much of it, I went back inside and continued on with whatever I was doing, thinking that she was just boring herself off to sleep. A few weeks later, something very similar happened to this again, except this time, it was in the lounge room. Heidi was sitting with me on the couch. The family dog was also in the room, sitting by my feet, as Heidi all of a sudden started staring at the ceiling again, with much the same intensity as before in her room. This time, the dog joined in and was making much the same eye and head movements as Heidi was, as if they were both watching something on the ceiling move from side to side. The dog's hair then stood on the back of its neck, and he started growling, which frightened me, as he is one of the friendliest dogs in the world and wouldn't hurt a fly. Then, being a bit of a wimp, he got up and snuck into the next room and didn't come back for about a half an hour. This sort of thing has happened about 3 or 4 times since then, but nothing besides this has ever happened either. No apparitions or noises or banging. I've sometimes had the feeling, though, that we are not alone here. Nothing like this ever happens when my husband is at home, only when I am alone or with Heidi. A couple of days ago, it happened again. Heidi started off by staring at the ceiling, and then her gaze diverted to her toy basket in the corner of the room. She looked at me, smiled, looked back at the toy basket, pointed, and yelled baby. The word baby doesn't necessarily mean baby to Heidi. She calls newborns babies, as well as toddlers up to about her own age. I asked her where, Heidi. Where is the baby? There, she persisted. There, baby. I shrugged and looked away again and hoped to dear God that she would stop pointing and looking at that darn toy basket. She did, thankfully, after only about a minute or so this time. What do you honestly think about this? Fluke? Or something more than just imaginative child playfulness? This website has mentioned dark, powerful energies such as imps, and I noticed the creator of this website has seen what could be called imps. Imps are described as devil spirits, who are demons, and small in stature. I've had many experiences throughout my life like the one the web creator had growing up. I don't like talking about them so much, and do my best to keep it dormant, but I did read their story, and I've had an experience with a small black figure that sounds like one of the imps described in that story. Me, my daughter, and my wife all used to sleep in the same bed till our little girl was 1.5 years old. Around the time my daughter was that age, I remember staying up till close to 1 or 2 a.m. watching a long movie. When I was finished, I went to the room and turned on the bathroom light to brush my teeth. Our room was well lit from the bathroom. Since around the age of 3, I've had dealings with spirits as well. So, when I was about halfway through my brushing, I pretty much knew from that feeling I had that something was happening. I looked in the room where my daughter and wife were sleeping, and called from behind my daughter in a fetal position was a small black figure. It looked human, but it moved, behaved, and felt like it was something else. It looked towards me, got on all fours, and scurried across the bed lightning fast. I kinda jumped back, but it disappeared when it hit the floor. The strange thing was, after I got into bed, my daughter, eyes closed, still asleep, did the exact same thing the figure did before I went to bed. Only my daughter stopped with her still sleeping face right in mine, then laid back down and was normal again. Some other things started happening after that, but I don't know if they're related. I hope my story helps you figure out what these things are. My story begins about 3 years ago. I was 27, and me and my husband were expecting our first child. We had been living with his mother, but since I had become pregnant, we needed a place of our own. My parents owned 2 houses, one in which they lived in, and the other right behind theirs. My oldest brother and wife and children used to live there, but he bought the house right next door to my parents. Always wanted to stay close to our family. We're very close. Now that the house behind my parents was unoccupied, my mother asked me to move in. My husband and I gladly accepted. We would have more room and a place of our own. Well, the very next day we moved in, I was about 41 weeks pregnant and needed to go to the hospital to be induced for labor. We had a healthy baby boy. After our stay in the hospital, we returned to our new home. About 4 to 6 weeks after we moved in, I started hearing a noise in the middle of the night, coming from the closet in our bedroom. My husband worked a graveyard shift most nights at the time, so I was alone at night with our son a lot. The noise was that of the closet door opening. I had put a long rectangular mirror on the closet door, those that are about 1 foot wide and 4 feet long. It had 2 hooks that went over the top of the door, so as to hang the mirror. So every time you opened it, it would screech very loudly, since the metal hooks rubbed against the door frame. Well, like I said, about 4 to 6 weeks after we moved in, I heard this very loud screech at about 2:30 to 3 a.m. I woke up and realized it was the closet door opening. It opened about 4 inches. We had 2 chinchillas that slept on the floor at the end of the bed, and I just rationalized it to one of them opening the door with their paw. But I know that would have to take some effort, since the metal hooks over the top of the door made it hard to open, and would make the door get stuck. I didn't really get scared. I just looked, then went back to sleep. About 2 weeks later, again, me asleep, alone, middle of the night. Then the screeching sound of the closet door opening. I woke up, and this time, sat up and looked at the closet door. What just happened? I checked on my baby in his bassinet next to my bed, and he was fast asleep. I looked at the chinchillas. They were awakened too, and looking at the closet door, but had not moved. So again, I felt no fright and went back to sleep. Again, a few weeks later, my husband had a day off, so he was home that night. And again, about 2 or 3 a.m., the screeching noise of this closet door being pushed open from the inside. My husband wakes up and just stares at the door. Now he saw firsthand what I had told him about. The last time this happened was some weeks after that. Again, I was alone at night. I heard the screeching sound of the door opening, only it sounded like it opened a little bit wider than just 4 inches this time. I sat up and looked at the door. The chihuahuas were staring at the closet door as well. This time, they stood up. Then the closet door started opening a little bit further still. That set the chihuahuas off. One was barking at the closet door like there was no tomorrow, and the other ran under the bed crying and howling. Their reaction is what scared me the most. My heart was racing. I put my head under the covers. The closet door didn't open further, but it took me forever to get back to sleep. After that night, I was scared of the closet. I told my husband, and he put a lock on the door. I closed it and locked it every night. I didn't open it again. Only one thing happened after that. About a year later, the closet door became increasingly harder to close. It would get stuck, and I would really have to push to close it completely. One Sunday night, about 7:30 p.m. this time, I again was home alone. My husband was working, and my son was with my parents in the house in front of ours. I was watching some TV, and I didn't like to leave the closet door open anymore. So I walked over to the closet door to try and close it completely. I was really pushing, and I started banging on the door with my fist to try and close it. It was almost closed. Then, while I was banging with my fist, right on the other side of the door there was a loud bang, as if someone hit it with their fist. It was right on the spot I was hitting it. I could feel the vibration against me. I stepped away from the closet door. I tried to stay calm. I'll try to sit down and watch some TV, I told myself. I sat down, but could not keep my eyes off the closet door. After about 30 seconds, I decided I couldn't stay in the house any longer. I left my parents' house in front of mine and left the TV on. Why did that scare me so much? I was fine when the closet door would open in the middle of the night. Was it because I was so sleep deprived from having an infant son that it was so easy for me to go back to sleep? The fact that I heard the banging on either side of the closet unnerved me so much. Thinking back, I remembered when I was 14 and my brother first moved in the very same house with my then 4-month pregnant sister-in-law and her 4-month-old daughter from a previous marriage. I remember shortly after they moved in, her telling me she thought the house was haunted. I asked why, and she told me that at night, she would see the closet doorknob rattle and turn. Oh, it's just her imagination, I told her. Even at 14, I would rationalize everything. I guess it wasn't her imagination after all. I later asked my niece, now 21, if she ever saw anything. She told me she did, which I later write about. This is something completely different to my experience, and I think it had something to do with her and not the house. She also used to tell me that the closet door used to open in front of my brother until he confronted it. Then it stopped. Thank you for taking the time to read my story. I live about 20 minutes from an old covered bridge in Mableton, Georgia. This is one of the places I've been to in the surrounding area and where I had the most happen. In 2004, we went on a last-minute hunt to the bridge. I know you're supposed to be better prepared, but I kept most of my things in the car at all times, just in case. We of course had heard the local legends and wanted to see for ourselves, so we headed down after about midnight. Even then, the traffic on the road was just heavy enough that we were unable to try the chocolate thing with the car, so we parked up the road a ways away at the Comet Trail parking lot. We walked down and took our flashlights with us. On either side of the bridge are orange streetlights, so the bridge is lit up all the way through. One in the group brought her cousin, and I didn't realize at first that he had been drinking, or he would have stayed behind. He got up in one of the bridge's windows and peed into the creek below. After yelling at him to stop, I realized I could no longer see the lights on either side of the bridge. Our flashlights also stopped working, all of them. After the temperature dropped and it became dark the way it did, I told others it was time to leave. We then saw the streetlights turn on for a second, and then in the distance, at the other end of the bridge, two kids dressed in formal attire, standing and hand-holding. Had to be about 30 seconds, but we saw it. We froze, then started back to the car. As we walked out of the bridge, we heard what sounded like little kids laughing, and they actually touched and poked at our backs as we hurried as fast as we could back up the hill. One of our group reported hearing a voice in his ear telling him to run. I have to say it was unsettling, and though I haven't been back to the bridge yet, it hasn't stopped me from going to other places. I've heard voices and gotten pics, and even had things happen at other sites. This one was one of the best ones, because I don't get physically touched by them often. I also believe nothing would have happened if he had not upset the spirits the way he did. I'm very much more careful about who I bring with now. Only one town over from our home stands one of the largest and most ornate railway stations in our state. The owners worked over 20 years bringing it back from neglect in a time gone by, as their second love is antiques. They have decorated it with period pieces throughout, now opened it as an outstanding restaurant. My husband and I often bring friends there to enjoy not only the wonderful food, but for the pleasure of watching them jump as the Amtrak fly by, only feet from the window. There is a very small organ that has been placed on a wall, not far from where we often sit. Several meals ago, our waitress entertained us by telling some people have commented there is a ghost attached to this instrument. One said she saw a very small, frail old lady standing by it, saying this isn't right, indicating dismay as to how our organ came to be sitting in an eatery. The waitress went on to say they never like to work alone when closing up, as there's so many unexplained noises. We enjoyed a meal there today, and as always, our conversation turned into the many thousands of people now gone that pass through these massive arched doors. Out of nowhere, I smelled a very strong odor of ivory soap. Mind you, we are eating fish, no one is passing by, and the other tables haven't changed their patrons. I say nothing, but a moment later, my husband smells it and says how weird it is. Such an uncommon smell today. It lasted for about 3 minutes. There was no explaining the smell. As we finish, we wander through the hall looking at various rail-related antiques and move on to the outside. There's an Amtrak train on the track, but it is going slow. Strange, as they usually are speeding enough for an onlooker to feel their wind as they pass, heading for Boston. It comes to a complete stop at the station. A man in uniform gets out and looks at the front and then under. Turning to us, he says he thought he saw someone laying on the track. He walks about, making a full inspection. Then he gets in and then starts going. We see the riders in their seats, but as we watch, he stops again, just down the track, and repeats the inspection again. Strange day. This place should be investigated. This is my second entry and story. This takes place in Rusk, Texas in the 70s. This story comes from an acquaintance of mine, who is really more of a good friend of mine, of my good friends. Mike and Katie were married and had 2 children. One was a 9-year-old boy, and the other was a 5-year-old girl. They moved into a house that had a shotgun-style layout. In other words, you entered into the living room, and there was a straight hallway all the way to the back door, with all of the rooms off of this one main hallway. Mike and Katie took the first door on the right as their bedroom, while giving the children the last door on the left to their bedroom. One night, not long after the move, Mike and his wife were sound asleep when they were awakened by screams of Mommy and Daddy, and turned on the nightstand lamp to find both their children wide awake and terrified. The children claimed to have seen a man with a hat on and a beard peering into their window. Mike immediately got his gun and ran around the back, where he found an empty field and no sign of anyone having been there. At first, they were under the impression that this man had a ladder because the back of the house stood on a steep grade down, and no one could be peering into one of the back windows without a ladder. But the occurrence repeated itself, and finally, Mommy asked the kids to describe exactly what they had seen. Their stories were both told at different sessions and matched completely. What had woken the children was a strange light out the window and someone walking up and down on what sounded like wood boards. They said this man leaned over and looked down into the window, and he had a shotgun in his hands. The couple moved the children to another room, and Mike did some laborious digging into the history and county files in the house. Through newspapers and files, plus some additional info from some of the older townspeople, Mike learned that this house had once been at another location, and when it was moved, it was turned around so that what had been the front of the house was now the back of the house. He also learned that the man who had died at the house had been arrested and died in prison for shooting his wife and her lover in their bed with a shotgun. I've sent in one other story about my mother's house in Illinois, but I have 2 more stories to share. I was raised by my grandparents. Their house has its share of odd occurrences: knocking sounds from within the walls, an apparition of my great-grandmother, and eerie feelings down the long hallway to the bedrooms. One night, I was around 9 in 1989. I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep. My bed was facing the doorway, and I could see into my grandparents' bedroom across the hall. The hall is only about 4 feet wide. The only light visible came from a small night light in the outlet at the center of the hall. As I was tossing and turning, trying to fall asleep, I looked out into the hallway and saw a young woman with curly hair, her body glowing faintly. She carried a candle in her cupped hands. She walked slowly and paused for a second and turned to look into my grandparents' room. Being the nervous child I was, I quickly pulled the covers over my head and ignored it, eventually falling asleep. Years passed, and I never saw another apparition. When I was 16, 1996, I was still living there. I grew up in that house, 13 years total, and had moved across the hall, having switched rooms with my grandparents. I decided I would try an experiment. I found a dress similar to the one I saw the apparition wearing, so I decided I would put it on and sort of relive that experience. I have very curly hair, and it was the same length as the apparitions. I put on the dress, grabbed a short white candle, turned off the hall light, lit the candle, and took the path that I had witnessed the apparition take. I took the same route, made the slow walk, paused at my old bedroom door, looked in, and walked into what was now my bedroom. Was what I saw a ghost, or merely a glimpse into my future? Was I seeing myself on some other intersecting point of time? I'm still trying to figure that one out. Next story. This occurred in 1997, while I was at a Native American ceremony in the woods in Nebraska. We had been out in the woods for about a week, living in our tents and teepees, ceremonies going on throughout that time. I'd heard the stories of spirits who lived in the trees, and being as curious as I am about the supernatural, I was nervous and excited to see what might be out there. For the first few days, things were normal, and I went about my business working in the cook shack, making large quantities of food for the huge number of people there. One evening, after dinner, I was sitting at a table with the aider, talking about the name he had just given me, Star Woman, for my love of looking at the stars for hours on end, when my right hand suddenly went ice cold. My mother was sitting to my left, and I said, "Wow, my hand just went freezing cold." There was no wind, and it was July in Nebraska, pretty hot, even after the sun went down. She said, "Oh, don't worry, that's just a spirit touching you." I can't recall the name for them, so I'll just say spirit. I think it was Wayne Guy, but I'm not sure. Okay, no big deal. Our tent was set up along the perimeter of the tree line, with an outhouse about 50 feet to the right. On several occasions, while walking to the outhouse, I noticed black human forms in the trees. When I'd shine my flashlight on them, they were gone. I attributed this to my imagination. A few days later, a friend who had brought along for the trip was sitting in my tent with me, talking about the day. I was on the left side, leaning back on my arms, with my lantern flashlight next to my left hand, about 12 inches away. It was the kind where you could pull up the body of the flashlight to reveal a lantern. We were talking, and we noticed the light shifting in the tent. There were no other lights, aside from a bonfire on the side of the camp at about 300 feet. I looked at my flashlight, and it was standing on its edge. All we could do was sit and watch it. It stood on its edge for about 2 minutes. Then we decided to leave the tent for a while, because we were a bit freaked out. The flashlight had a rounded head, not a square one. My hand did cause the tent floor to dent in slightly, but my flashlight was nowhere near my hand or the dent I made in the floor. The light was literally standing on one rounded edge. When I mentioned it to my mom the next day, she quipped, "They were playing with you. They must like you." I wasn't really scared, just a bit nervous, considering we were out in the wilderness with no lights. I was intrigued more than anything, considering the nature of the ceremony we were attending. I'm certain the spirits were focused by our activity. I hope to return to that spot in the future. This occurred in Miami, Florida in 1980 when I was 15. I still don't know if this was a paranormal experience, but it was unsettling nevertheless. I was babysitting for the next door neighbors one evening. Their daughter was down for bed, and I was in the family room watching TV. They had a small anchor biter type dog, and it went to the double sliding glass doors that led out into the rear patio and pool area, like it wanted to go to the bathroom. All of the homes in this area had a screened-in patio pool enclosure, and when you opened the sliding glass door to step out into the patio, immediately to your left was a screen door that led into the backyard. Unlike most of the homes in my neighborhood though, the backyard was surrounded by a chain-link fence. So I go and open the sliding glass door, which was completely covered by trays for privacy, to let the dog out. The dog steps out, and I immediately hear the crunching of grass in the yard to my left, as though someone is walking in the backyard. Startled, I look to my left, and there is what appears to be a man, adult size, reaching out as if to open the screen door. I immediately slammed the glass sliding door shut, scared out of my wits. I stood frozen in fear in the living room. Silence. After a few minutes, I cautiously peered through the curtain onto the patio. No one there, just a dog sniffing around. I let the dog in, and he did not appear agitated at the least. I never thought much about it after that, until years later. If there was someone there, why didn't the dog bark? If it was supernatural, animals are known to get agitated, yet nothing. My imagination? Definitely not. Nothing like that ever occurred again, in subsequent babysitting for that neighbor. You're still here? Well, if you're listening to this video even now, you might as well give it a share and a like and comment on the video below. Come on, you've already been here all the time. I mean, if you're coming here regularly. If you're new, why don't you subscribe anyway? Because, I would appreciate it, and I'll love you as far as I can see the moon. I don't even know if that makes any sense, but since I can't make any sense, why don't you subscribe, and hopefully maybe I'll make sense in the future, and then you'll be doing a noble cause by doing this. Phantoms, I'm back, and thanks so much for being patient. I know I've not been able to get the video out in a timely manner, and I apologize severely for that. I don't know why I said severely, but you guys know what I mean. But yeah, just disregard what I was saying earlier, except about the sharing, because you guys really need to share the video. If I do share the video, then everybody will see it. So if you share it too, then that means more people will see it too. So hopefully you guys can do it. Let me know in the comment section below which video you like the most. I mean, which stories you like the most. And I'm messing up as usual, so I'm just going to go now. So guys, seriously love you. I want to hear from you, so let me know in the comment section how you're doing, what stories you like, that, blah, blah, blah. Feeling a little under the weather, but that's okay because I got a 30-minute video out for you guys. Love you and good night. And good morning, I guess. I don't know, whatever part of the day it is for you. Bye-bye.